Yeah, I'm Neil Cullen, and my wife and I farm here in the Glen Omaru Valley, which is situated 20 k's south of Balclutha in South Otago. We have 648 hectares of sheep and beef farm with 140 hectares of exotic forest, and we're also fortunate enough to have 130 hectares of mixed podocarp native forest. Our farm adjoins a dock reserve of just under 500 hectares, and it provides a lot of bird life to our farm. But we also have the 130 hectares of native forest on our farm, and of that over 90 hectares is protected by QE2 covenant. This has been quite an easy process to go through. The QE2 people are very easy to deal with. They'll help with the fencing of blocks. It may seem when you're starting off with forestry that it's a long time to that first income, but once you do get to a rotation going, it's an ongoing source of income, and it can be very useful to you can space the harvesting to suit your needs. You've got a lot of flexibility as to when and where you harvest. One thing that we've learnt with once you start harvesting forest, you become more appreciative of the need for good planning when you go to plant trees in respect of how you're going to harvest them. It's all very well to plant out a rough block at the back of your farm, but if the cost of roading in order to harvest those trees is too high, they may end up being almost worthless as far as timber products are concerned. This shoutabout is made up of eucalyptus cordata with an underplanting of toy. The cordata is probably going to be too vigorous for the toy to actually survive, but it has helped with the shouter up till now. The advantages of this particular species are they're narrow growing and they keep their leaves right to the ground, and also they flower in late winter and early spring when there's nothing else flowering around, so the native birds really love them, and it's great coming out on a cold spring day and seeing tuis and bellbirds fighting over the flowers on these trees. And this particular paddock is also shouted on the east side by a Eucalyptus johnsoni and flax shoutabout, and to the south we have a Pinus radiata plantation in a gully, so it is shouted from three sides, which covers most problem areas for the weather, so this paddock's really good. It's covered all options as far as shelter goes. One other aspect of the farm forestry on this farm is that we've chosen to plant the trees on the porous ground initially, the poor soils, heavily podzolized soils of low natural fertility. So by doing that and concentrating our resources on the farming on the better country, we were able to maintain our stocking rate even though we were taking out land for planting right up until recent years. So we started here with 45 hectares of forest and 4,000 stock units. We increased our forest area up towards 100 hectares without having to reduce the stocking rate because of that, taking out the poorer country and improving the better country. We have reduced our stocking rate the last 3 years as we've stepped up the planting rate, and we're now down to 3,500 stock units, but we've got that 140 hectare block of forestry now, which is going to start producing returns for us. This is a 1993 planted gully of Pinus radiata. It was best fenced off and it's providing shelter for this paddock. But it's important to plan your planting so that taking into account all the silviculture work that you're probably going to face in the future, so that you don't overload yourself with an unexpected expense by planting. If you plant big blocks, big areas of Pinus radiata, and you want to prune them all to 6 metres, you're going to have to plan the expense that's going to be involved in that, especially if you're using outside contractors. Some people have planted a lot of trees and then found that they can't manage the cost of the silviculture, and they fell behind with their pruning regime, and then they've lost the value of the money they've already spent. So you can be flexible about this by having blocks that possibly on poorer country that you just go for high volume, lower grade timber that's going to go as export logs, so you don't need to have a pruning regime on them. By spreading your planting regime, you get that more steady income when it comes to the harvesting at the other end, and that makes it easy, of course, for as far as tax returns go and working it into your farm income. The block that my family harvested in 2003 of 7 hectares, they netted over $230,000 from that, or over $40,000 per hectare. They were fortunate to harvest at a time when log prices were right at a peak, and it was a heavy yielding block as far as volume went. So, but I think people should expect to get at least $30,000 per hectare from well-tended fine rotations. It is also important to get good advice, whether it's through your local branch of the farm forestry or through consultants. There's a lot of good experience out there, and important to get that advice for your local area. What's the best species, the best regime that will suit your area, because each area has its own growing patterns, its own diseases and problems. So it pays right at the start to get that advice, speak to people that have done it before you, go to farm forestry field days and see what other people are doing in your area. In the late 1990s we started a program of riparian planting on the main stream that flows through our property, the Glen Omaru stream. We've started at the bottom end in 1999, and we're gradually working our way up the stream, and we're planting natives on either side. The reason for this is obviously to keep the stock out of the waterway and protect the waterway from the stock, and also to have that buffer on either side to filter out any nutrients that might be flowing in from the paddocks, phosphate or nitrogen, and to enhance the appearance of the property, and generally to protect the waterway. It's important to have the right plants in the right place on your riparian plantings. We've put flaxes and toys near the waterways, and they can stand being flooded, and you don't have to have all the plants in at once. The ones that are easiest to establish are toys, flaxes and cabbage trees. You can just use them for a start off and then interplant later on with other species as the shelter gets up, and you can always go back and put more in later. This is another gully that we've planted off, primarily for shelter. Originally there was just a couple of rows of Douglas fir along the east side. In '94 we put the deer fence up on this side and planted eucalyptus nitens in the gully and western red cedar or Thuya placata down the western side. The idea is that the nitens especially will provide that tall shelter, and sometime in the next 15 years the nitens and the Douglas fir could be harvested, and the Thuya, which is a slower growing species, will stay here and retain some shelter and be the base of the next block of trees that are planted. We try to have most of our shelter belts running north and south, so that means that the sun is able to shine on both sides of the shelter during the day, so that the paddocks aren't shaded, and it also breaks the prevailing wind which comes down the valley from the southwest or westerly. And we also do get quite vigorous easterlies at times as well, so this is the most effective way to have your shelter break. But you have to plan them as far as shading goes, that you don't get excessive shading on the south side. You can also hear the birds here, which that's just an added bonus of having those flowering trees on your property. You're going to attract more bird life, provide a habitat that they're happy in. Behind me we have another gully that we've fenced off and planted out. Again, it was made stock management easier, and it's protecting the stream that runs down the gully. In this block we've chosen hybrid cypresses for their vigour and good form, and we've also chosen a stocking rate that allows the grass to keep growing, and you could graze this block, but with care, because they're thin bark trees and you'd have to manage the stock carefully. So overall, I think for any young farmer with a farm like this, there's always opportunities to plant trees. It's a matter of, as I say, getting advice from people that have already been through that experience about the species, where to plant, planting trees in places that will give you good shelter. You might be looking for areas where you can pre-lamb shear sheep and have shelter from all sides, so or you might want a block with wide spacing where you can put stock underneath after you're shearing. So trees can be an integral part of your stock management, and of course you're enhancing the value of your property and the appearance of your property. One of the great things I've enjoyed with this property is that we're doing landscaping on a huge scale, and just noticing the effect we've had in the last 20 years here on the landscape. It's something that not many people get a chance to do that. So it's a very rewarding thing. Even if you don't live long enough to harvest the trees, you get an enormous amount of pleasure from seeing them grow and seeing healthy trees and being sure that that's the best land use for that land. But there is a chance of good return when they are harvested.